Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Ladies and gents, welcome back. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by Sarah Shendy. Sarah, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And a sergeant, yeah?
Yes,
That's alliteration, right? You got a triple S and
I know.
Sarge, congrats. Was that last year or
It'll
before that?
be it'll be 1 year this month on the 24th.
Oh, look at that. You're almost off probation. You got a year
I
probation is that a thing?
Our probation is actually very short, so I got off probation way quicker than I
Oh,
anticipated. But it is very celebratory because this month also marks my 16th year in law enforcement. So
nice.
it's insane. I posted like a really cool 1 minute reel on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Um, and someone was like, your video's too long, like the reels are supposed to be shorter. And I'm like, listen, first of all, I only included the last 3 years. Secondly, yeah, I always feel so privileged and so honored looking back and reflecting back on my journey. And I know that we share the same sentiment when I say that, like, we always look and take in consideration everybody that helped us get to where we are today.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a big deal. It'll be me being a sergeant for a year at Case, and then my 16th year in law enforcement.
Yeah, well, congrats. We're so close,
Thank
and
you.
this summer will be 17 for me, and yeah, fantastic road. Congrats that we met from being the IACP 40 under 40. So that was 2022.
Yep.
And not only that, but you're another 40 under 40 recipient I just saw. So tell us
Yes.
about that.
Yeah. So again, I just feel extremely, extremely, extremely privileged and honored. And people told me to stop saying that I feel lucky, but I do feel lucky, And the 40 under 40 that I received this year, that was just announced last week, I believe, is from the Arab America Foundation. They have 40 under 40, 30 under 30, and I believe 20 under 20, and they recognize Arab Americans within the communities that are, going above and beyond in their field. And this recognition means the world to me. And I will tell you that, like, I don't know about you, but like the IACP 40 under 40, I said, and I was quoted that it was like my career lottery, because what's bigger than being recognized by the international law enforcement community?
Yeah.
So I was definitely, and I still am, like, high off life because of that. But I do have to say that with the 40 under 40 from the Arab America Foundation, I think that this is like a bigger deal for my parents and for my
Sure.
family, because it's from an organization that prides itself on Arab American heritage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like I don't like making comparisons like that. I think it's fair to say from the outside, like both are extremely impressive, right? You're getting a extreme level of validation, recognition, and honor from very reputable communities, and at the top of those communities. And so IACP, that one's kind of like just still fuzzy for me, where I'm like, the timing was really tough to get into town. I didn't go for the conference. We came in for the awards banquet and childcare and things. Like, we just did a quick trip, my wife and I. And so I think being jet lagged, just being like, oh my gosh, like this is really a thing. And then you do like this kind of morning presentation where I got to meet you real quick, and I didn't
Yeah.
really mingle. Like, there's a part of me with that process where I feel and felt so honored. And then literally, like, once it was done and I was kind of like leaving, I was like, man, I wish there was kind of like more like a mingle, like maybe,
Right.
like a 4 p.m., like, happy hour or something where people would just
Yeah.
connect and you get to talk to people from literally around the world about these
Yeah.
things. I think I tried to find a couple people on LinkedIn, afterwards, and connected on social. Other than that, like, that's kind of it.
I know. And I think too that the breakfast was so early. It was at 7 a.m. and they had a bunch of stuff. Like people were kind of in a hurry to leave, I would say,
Yeah.
but I felt the
Mhm.
same way. And I remember we didn't take a class picture, but
Yeah, yeah. Like,
yeah,
I
it
got
was. It's
yeah, but super cool. Yeah, without further ado, tell me a little bit about, like, your background and what brought you into law enforcement.
Sure. So I get that question all the time from
Mhm.
everybody, and
Yeah.
my short answer is always God. And I think that regardless of what religion or faith people believe in or follow, that we can all agree, that things happen for a reason
Yeah.
and things happen in a very timely manner, which is hard for me to say and accept. I feel like a huge hypocrite saying that because I'm a part of like the instant gratification generation. When it comes to other people, I'm very, very, very patient. Like from kids to adults to calls, I'm very patient. When it comes to myself and the goals that I aspire to achieve, I lack patience a
Mm.
lot. And it's something that I'm very cognizant of and something that I'm always working on. When I went to Kent State University, which was one of my biggest career highlights, is the fact that they gave me space and they featured me in their magazine. I struggled really, really bad in college, like really bad. I just was speaking to a student the other day at Case, and I told her, I said, the challenges that you're going through are very common right now, given your age and where you are in your college career. And when I went to college, I was 16, and everybody's like, oh my God, you're so smart. And I'm like, no, that's not why. It's because my parents, being Arab American parents, and I guess I'm considered to be first generation because they were not
Yeah.
raised here. I was.
Mhm. Mhm.
And they were very worried about some things that were going on in our high school. And you know how it is. Every school has a little bit of issues. It's absolutely not the majority of the student body.
Yeah.
And I would also dare to say that the students that do have issues are not bad kids. Some of them just happened to be dealing with really terrible things in life. Needless to say, my parents wanted us out of high school as quick as possible. So we took summer school, I think 3 years in a row. So all the girls in my family, because we're four girls and one boy, all of us graduated high school in 3 years instead of four. And that's why I went to college so young, which is like great, but it's also not good. Going to a very liberal environment. And when I say liberal, I'm not associating that with Kent State. I'm associating that with the fact that I was in a very conservative Arab American Muslim household
Mm.
where like the bell rang at 3:15 and we power walked home as quick as possible.
Mhm.
And we never went to football games, baseball game, dances, none of that. Like my parents were very, very, very restrictive. And of course, when you're growing up, it's annoying and it leads to a lot of things like rebellion and like bad relationship with your parents because at the time we were too immature to understand that our parents were really just trying to protect us.
Yeah.
But I went to Kent and I majored in what my dad wanted us to major in, which did not go well. He has his PhD in chemistry. He's very, very, very
Oh, wow.
smart. He has like the periodic table memorized, and I'm like, don't. That's nothing to brag about. He's like
Well,
a
it is to
math whiz,
somebody, but yeah.
right?
No, I feel
Him and
you.
his colleagues.
Yeah.
He's like a math whiz, and of course, like again, I'm so young. I'm trying to please my parents and my family, and I did not do well in school. And I do take partial responsibility because I was also hanging out with the wrong group of people,
Mm.
which we all know can like ruin
Yeah.
your life. And I got put on academic probation, and I had to meet with Dean Moore, who, God bless him, he passed during COVID.
Mm.
But he met with me, and I remember sitting in his office, and he said, Sarah, what are you going to do differently? And I said, I want to major in criminal justice and my grades are going to go up and like please give me this one last chance because if you kick me out like my parents are legitimately going to kill me. So I did. I majored in criminal justice and you can like literally see a shift on my transcript of like maybe a C, primarily D's, F's, and W's for withdrawal. And then when
Mm.
I majored in criminal justice, all of my grades were A's and B's. I got like one C and I made the dean's list and I graduated on the dean's list.
Congrats. Look at that.
Thank you. It was a big
A little
transition.
bit of passion goes a long way, right?
For sure, and
Yeah.
accountability.
Mm.
Sometimes you have to have these conversations with yourself, like, get it the heck together. You know better, and if you know better, you should do better. And during my criminal justice courses, I met Jim Owens, who we know in terms of recruitment that majority of officers join the profession because of conversation with another officer, or a previous officer, someone that has law enforcement history. He told me, I remember standing in his office, and he said, Kent State is bringing back the police academy. And I said, okay, cool, good conversation. Like, why are you telling me this? And he's like, I think you should go. You'd make a great officer. He's like, I've had you in so many classes. You're
Mm,
passionate. You're a great communicator. You really care. And I went to the police academy, and I have been in love since. So that's
yeah.
that's how I got in. It was just I've always wanted to be an officer, and to be honest with you, like I really don't remember talking about this, but when I got the 40 under 40, and it was such an awesome, amazing privilege to get the front page at the Akron Beacon Journal, which is one of the two major newspapers here where I live.
Yeah.
And I had a couple people from middle school and high school reach out to me, and they said, I'm so happy you accomplished your dream. You always talked about being a police officer. And
Oh, you didn't
I don't
remember that?
remember, no, I don't
Wow.
remember
Okay.
that because I definitely lacked confidence,
Hmm.
and I really went through a period of time where I just didn't feel like my life would amount to anything,
Mm,
and that's really going to dictate like the decisions that you make, the people that you hang out with. Um, so yeah, I fell in love in the police academy. I loved the structure, the paramilitary expectations, the camaraderie. I love being challenged. Like I seek out challenges. The majority of the
yeah.
public stays away from anything uncomfortable.
Hmm.
And then there are people that go towards things that are very uncomfortable because we know that that's where growth happens.
Man, I love that. What a crash course through these things. And before I forget, I do want to ask, like, when you chose to change to criminal justice, where did that come from, if not policing right away?
Yeah, it's always been a huge passion of mine. I always, and to this day, like working with kids is my number one absolute passion. And my major at Kent was criminal justice, and my minor was juvenile delinquency. And I
Mm,
worked in corrections for a little bit. But the thing is, like, and my parents are like the most amazing, wonderful people on the face of the planet, and my whole family and my group of friends are. But, again, being so young, I was like, oh, okay, if this is what my dad expects us to major in, this is what I'm going to major in because I want to make him proud and happy,
yeah.
and I don't want to disappoint him. And in our culture and in many cultures around the world, it's a priority for you to honor your family.
Hmm.
And that's another thing that people really misunderstand here in America and in the Western world in general. I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm not saying that with a negative connotation. I'm not saying that absent of boundaries. I'm saying that to this day, I always put myself in certain situations and I take advantage of certain opportunities, of course, because it's going to help me become more successful and more fulfilled. But any opportunity that I can take advantage of that's going to make my parents smile, I'm 110% doing it, regardless of how it may impact me or impact my social life or whatever else.
Mm,
I always, they made so many sacrifices. My four grandparents, when they died, my parents were not there. They were always in another country doing something for us.
mm,
And there's nothing that I can do to remotely equate any of their sacrifices. So I always want them to know that every single sacrifice that they made was worth it.
yeah. Man, you covered a lot that I was going to ask you more about, and so to build on that, because my story is not super dissimilar. There's a lot of traditional cultural norms, with what I know and what you've shared about Arab culture and Asian culture, specifically East Asian culture, where my family is from. And so to be the first generation that was born in the US myself, yeah, there were a lot of pressures and societal pressures and familial pressures. And I just want to take a moment to reflect and share, for the audience, like how much I heard of this degree of empathy, because I love this notion. I just heard this where someone was discussing people with rough childhoods, and it's the notion of you can recognize, regardless how it was, generally like 99.9% of the time, and people might consider a lot of really unideal circumstances, and especially in law enforcement, the things we see, but the large majority of the time people are doing the best they could, right? The best they knew how to, and a lot of that could
Yes.
be from tradition, a lot of that can be cultural, a lot of that could be socioeconomic, right? And so already, in this brief intro to the conversation and learning about you, I've heard a lot of little nuggets where you made it very clear that you're a highly empathetic person. Uh, has that always been a thing, or what has helped you?
Always.
Yeah.
Always. I tell people all the time, I suffer from compassion fatigue and I'm totally okay with it because I would never, ever, ever want it the other way. And, like growing up here, so I came to the US when I was 6 and I'm turning 40 this October. So we can say like my whole life, the majority of my life. And I tell people all the time, like especially in speaking engagements and when I teach certain classes, like there's a lot of things that happen here in the US that people think is normal, and I can guarantee you it's not normal.
Mm,
And it's very like, aside from the fact that it's abnormal, it's not good for you as a human being, as a society. And we can tell that there is a huge, huge, huge difference between how the rest of the world operates and how the US operates. And, there's no doubt that I love this country and that I'm extremely thankful and feel very privileged to be here. But empathy and compassion are so deeply embedded in us that it doesn't matter if I live here until 110, I'm still going to be the Sarah that was raised in an Arab American Muslim household. And so many of my interviews and articles that I've participated with or wrote online reflect that. And I've had so many families, primarily on very tough calls, like, I'm a victim advocate at heart, calls like death notifications, suicides, where there was a loss of life or a huge tragedy where I was involved as an officer. um, I always go back and check on the family. I have like these personalized stationery cards that, because sometimes like you have to be very careful and you have to consider professionalism and timing when it comes to all this stuff. And if it's too soon to stop by, I drop a card. I'll call. If nobody answers, I'll leave a voicemail. I'll send an email, and then I'll stop by. Or sometimes I'll stop by the next day. Every single case and every single call that we go on is very different. And so many people are like, why are you so different? Like, we've
mm,
never met anybody like you. And believe me, I am not like the cream of the crop out here. And I tell people all the time, don't you dare think that I'm perfect or that I'm free of flaws or free of sin. I'm just as imperfect as every single other human being in our society. However, empathy and compassion is something that is so deeply rooted within us. And I love that. And I love that, like, regardless of what's going on around me in my community, in the world, I love that I feel pain for others. And I think that that's a gift, just like vulnerability is a gift. And I can tell you for a fact, and I know that a lot of first generation immigrants, regardless of, what part of the world they may come from, we have similar conversations and things are just like, they can see that when things happen around them, whether it's a really bad call that they went on or something that's happening in the country here in the US or somewhere else in the world, we perceive things very, very, very differently. We're not
yeah.
distracted with football and Housewives of Miami and all of this nonsense that's on TV that is there to distract the public with what really matters and what really goes on. We are so fixated on the people that are hurting, why they are hurting, and how we can help them. And I just love that. And of course, how you do one thing is how you do everything. So it has definitely carried over into how I police. And I would bet to say, and I've said this every chance that I get, is that being raised in an Arab American Muslim household is the primary reason why I have been so successful as an officer.
There's so much. I mean, it's beaming with inspiration and positivity, which is like, I think, not a far stretch to say what contributed towards your success. And I mean that in so many ways, to be why people are gravitating towards you, your story, your brand, like the things that you do that make you you. You're
Hmm.
humbly unapologetic, which I think is like, that's truly what confidence is. That's like what the ness is that I think so many of us, I don't know, just speaking for me and you having this conversation right now, a lot of what you said about not having a certain level of confidence, like certainly that resonates with me. Certainly that was me, and I've spoken a lot about that. But I think that the more I do this career and the more I do life, I recognize that a lot of the things I was trying to be, that's not the way to go about it, right? Like I
Hmm.
found like the things that make me the best cop or the best leader are things that have always been there. They're just me, right? They're just
Mm-hmm.
my desire to be helpful, my desire to build relationship, my desire to build trust and communicate or meet people where they are, not to be the person, the technical knowledge base, not to be the person that just has to know it all. It's more the
Mm-hmm.
question asker and the curious
Yes.
person.
Mm-hmm.
But I hear so much of that in you and what you're sharing. There is a part of me that wants to ask, partly for my own self. I think it took me a long time to grow away from, I don't know if resentment's the right word, but there definitely was a degree of that. You talked a little bit about rebellious nature common in, kind of the first generation American kids of
Mm-hmm.
immigrant families. But for me, it took a, what was it like for your parents as they, you're trying to go with all these norms and expectations, but for you to pivot completely away from this direction to criminal justice and then law enforcement.
A misconception and a stereotype that I hear often is, when we talk about like millennials and Gen X and Gen Z, everybody's like, oh, you have to tell them why. No, every human being walking the planet wants to know why they're being
Yes.
asked to do something. It is
Yes.
a part of our human nature.
Hmm.
So I think that, like you said, we have to forgive our parents or whoever it is in our life for doing certain things a certain way, which may not have been like the best way to do things because that's all they knew and that's how they grew up.
Yeah.
And my parents, like I said, if this podcast was like a day long, there's no way that we would be able to cover all of the sacrifices that they made. And I think that like when I went to the police academy, I remember first of all, my parents didn't even know until I got home and I was like, "Hi, yeah, we got tased today." And then we got pepper sprayed the next day. And
Oh
my
my
dad's
gosh.
like, "What are they gonna do next? Are they gonna shoot you?" And at the time, my dad was like, "Oh, this is cool. Sada's the black sheep of the family. Like, let her get out of her system." And I'm like, okay, when someone is doing like something like a big commitment, it's not usually a phase. And they kind of just like left me alone with it,
Mm,
and they didn't resist it at all. And then they saw how much happier I was, and the like I was really putting 110% into it, and they just saw the outcome. And I was with a little police department when I first graduated from the academy. It was a small village in Wayne County, and ever since I can remember, like I've never held one job. I worked full-time corrections after the police academy, and I worked part-time at this police department, and my career didn't really begin to unfold in the best way ever until I worked with my previous agency, Copley Township, which is a department in Summit County. And I was just like, this is like the best thing on the planet. Like, I love this job, even on the
wow.
bad days, because on the bad days, I walked away from the call, the scene, the traffic stop, the accident, felt that I made things a little wee bit better for somebody. And you know what I learned recently when I was reading a leadership book is ironically type A personalities, which a lot of people in law enforcement are type A personalities. The way that we feel better about things during a bad day or a bad time is by doing something nice for someone else.
Hmm,
Like they associated that behavior with type A personalities. And I'm like,
interesting.
what an awesome opportunity to be in law enforcement as a type A personality person. And when you do feel down or that you're lacking fulfillment or you're just having a bad crap day, you can go do something nice for someone else, which for us is so easy to do. So my parents have been my entire family. They are my biggest cheerleaders. I am surrounded by the most amazing, wonderful people from my parents to my siblings, like my family in general. I've been with the same group of friends, some of them ever since we moved here to the US, which is super awesome looking at the progression of our photos,
Yeah.
ones that are not allowed to surface on the internet. And then friends that I have made along the way. And they are just like the best people I've met. Like extremely supportive, never have shown like a hint of jealousy. They're there with me on my good days, on my bad days, and I think that that is such an amazing thing to say, and sadly, a very rare thing to say, because I know you and I and a lot of other officers have encountered people that when we say like, who can you call? They're like, nobody. Like that is so sad.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't talk to my parents, or my family is this, or what about your aunts and uncles, or there's just like, whether it's like a toxic family structure or whatever, but as human beings, something that we long for and something that contributes to like our survivability is that connectiveness. And when people say like, oh, I don't need anybody, yes you do. It is
Yes.
how we were
Yeah.
built and how we were wired, and we're supposed to live amongst each other, and we're meant to support each other. So I definitely don't take that lightly in my life, and it's something that I'm very thankful and grateful for every day.
That's fantastic, and you said it so accurately. I think that even those that recognize that they have people, they might not have that many people in that like that close circle. And maybe this is just a good time to focus on that for those listening that are like, man, like I got some people, but how do you build that? How do you build that community? And a lot of that, it is vulnerability, right? You have to
Yeah,
let people in and allow people to be your people and allow them to show up for you. Do you think you could distill that down to like where you're at and how you got
for
there?
sure. Yeah, well, I think that you have to be authentic because nobody wants to be around anybody that's fake. And I think vulnerability is something that you absolutely have to value and practice. And when I say practice, I'm saying that like you need to check yourself sometimes when you're a part of the problem, when you use language on calls or at the PD or even in your personal life that you shouldn't have used because it's offensive or hurtful or unprofessional. And I think a lot of it is just like your willingness and your ability to put yourself out there. And like I cannot stress enough, and I talk about this all the time, the impact behind our energy and our body language. Um, Everybody from kids to adults, you do not have to be a trained officer or a trained detective to read someone's body language. And I've been around people that their body language and their energy is so negative and so toxic that I want nothing to do with them, regardless of how much they can help me in my career or with my goals, because I just don't like that. And all
Yes,
that
yeah,
comes from, you know what I mean? It comes from within. And that means like you have too much negativity going on inside you for that to be an exterior thing. So I always tell people, and like I really 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 try to lead by example, and I have done this my whole career, that like we as police officers, we're dealing with human beings. And yes, some of them are terrible human beings, but the majority of them are either good people that have never encountered law enforcement before, or they're good people that made bad decisions. And I'm not making excuses for anybody,
yeah,
or
absolutely.
they are good people that have been dealt a super crappy hand. I'm not making excuses. But when you pause and you think about the why behind people's behaviors, it is going to change your perspective. Is someone shoplifting makeup because they want to go sell it on Poshmark or whatever, or someone shoplifting diapers and formula because they lost their job because they were 5 minutes late? That matters to me. It's going to matter on how I speak to them and our encounter. And I remember there was like a shift in my career when I got sent to this call where it was really, really bad, and things like almost ended up horribly for me. But I remember pulling up to this call where a known prostitute in our jurisdiction was sexually assaulted. And on my way to the call, I said, you have absolutely no place to judge. It is not, you're not going there to judge her for anything that she does, for anything that she did, for how she chooses to live her life. You are there to help her. She's a victim of crime. And I hold myself extremely accountable with my thoughts, my intentions, my ideas, and my feelings when I deal with people. And that really shifted the way that I police and the way that I engage with people, in and out of uniform, on and off the clock, because who am I to judge?
Yeah,
First of all, secondly, when you judge somebody, you're doing absolutely nothing for them. You're not helping them heal. You're not helping them move towards recovery, and they're going to feel judged. You can't hide your energy.
yeah,
And when I have made mistakes on calls and used certain language or verbiage or done anything, I make sure to apologize. Like, I'm sorry that I said A, B, and C. That wasn't my intentions. I can see that it upset you. Can we start over? Because first of all, like, let's talk about how the way that you talk to people and like you respecting them and treating them with dignity and compassion is like a huge officer safety issue. And if an officer out there like mistreats somebody on a traffic stop, on a domestic, on an arrest, whatever the case may be, he could be setting up the next officer to get killed. Because why would that person care about law enforcement or about their next encounter with a police officer? All they're going to remember and all they're going to feel is how they were treated last time. And that's not something that we just experience directly. People can feel like that through vicarious experiences. You know, like we saw what happened across the country after the
Hmm.
George Floyd incident, after the Tamir Rice incident. And unfortunately, whether the police were lawful or not, and we know that the officers were not indicted in a lot of those cases, look at the magnitude of really unfortunate things that have happened around the country because people experienced those things vicariously through the news, through Netflix documentaries, through podcasts, through like the news, and that's going to make them feel some kind of way about law enforcement, and that's an officer safety issue to us. So
Yeah.
I'm very big on like respect and dignity. People can take so much away from you as a human being, but don't let that be if you when you take something away from somebody, don't let that be respect. Don't let it be their dignity because at the end of the day, that may be all they have.
That's so huge, and I appreciate you illustrating that so well. Like a lot of these different facets of just how we should treat people. I frequently say like the job is just people taking care of people, in critical
Mm-hmm.
times of stress is kind of the next component, and then there is a
Mm-hmm.
violence nature, right? Like it is absolutely true, right? If the barrier of entry to get people to treat people nicer is to recognize officer safety, then that's great. And you also very very well articulated like just the need for this service-based job, which we say public service, we say
Mm-hmm.
serve and protect, we say these things, but then like how are you serving people if you're not treating people with compassion, if you're not
Mm-hmm.
giving respect, if you're not treating people with dignity, and as best as you can checking your bias and reserving your judgment, because
Mm-hmm.
they don't need that. Chris Nielsen is a local cop over here, and he in an earlier episode said, yeah, man, like people don't need you to show up and tell them how bad things are. Clearly,
Right.
they
They
get
know.
it. Yeah, like regardless of their disposition, victim, suspect, whatever, life choices, like they don't need you to tell them. Like the fact that the police are here, like they get it. And I think it's a maturity thing. I've reflected a lot on myself and being a young officer coming in and how, in some ways I was very sheltered. So it was like good guys, bad guys. Kudos to my wife who's not in law enforcement, but as our daughter is approaching 5, she's asking about bad guys, and it's kind of like this Disney villain thing. We're like, well, like there's barely any bad quote unquote guys, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times people make mistakes. Does mommy and daddy make
Mm-hmm.
mistakes? Do you make mistakes? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's this thing again. Like I love that too. That you say, hey, no excuses. We have a job to do, and there are certain dynamics, but I like to inject that too because some people they get real it's almost like inflammatory. Oh, you don't want to hold accountability? No, absolutely. Like all about
Yeah.
accountability, right? All about
Mm-hmm.
our piece of this process, right? But I love how you explain so many things, and not just in that topic, but so far like it's very clear that you look at things at a big picture level, at a global level,
Yeah.
societally, because like what's going to help, what's going to contribute
Yeah.
towards making things a little bit better.
Yeah, and like that conversation with your daughter is so important because when I used to give like department tours to like the kids at Safety Town and we would go into like we didn't have a full functioning jail at Copley. We have like a holding cell, 3 holding cells, and they always ask when they go there and when they sit in the back of the cruiser, they say, is this where the bad guy sits? And I
Mm,
said, sometimes we deal with bad guys, but the majority of the time we deal with good people that make bad decisions. Do
yeah,
you make bad decisions? Have you seen mommy and daddy make bad? Because I don't want them to shun someone in their life that has been arrested,
yeah,
and like I get criticized all the time, and people say, like, oh, sacrificing officer safety. No, you can do both. You can do both. And I've been on calls and I've been in situations where there was use of force where I deployed my taser once or more than once. And after they're secured and after the officer safety issue has been eliminated, I have a conversation with them like, do you understand why that happened? You did A, B, and C, and you jeopardized my safety or the safety of someone else on scene, and you're not doing that with me or any other officer. And if you do that, if you continue to do that in the future, this is what's going to happen, or God forbid, something worse. So next time, don't do A, B, and C. And I've been on so many calls where like there's taser deployment, there's use of force, there's an arrest, there's multiple charges, and I take them to jail. And before the deputy takes them in the back, they shake my hand and they say, "Thank you for treating me with respect." You
Yeah.
can do both. You can definitely do both. You can do your job. You can always put officer safety as paramount where it should be, and you can still treat people with dignity and respect. Yeah, it's very important.
At the end of the day, it's a job where it's a profession, and I love how
Mm-hmm.
Jason Lehman, who's been on the show, "Why'd You Stop Me?" is his foundation. It's like a very prevalent culture in law enforcement was you'll give respect when you receive respect, right? You'd
Mm-hmm.
even say it sometimes to offenders or suspects, but I
Mm-hmm.
love how he highlights like no, like it's not. It can be a one way street. Like cops always have to give respect. Like
For sure.
you don't gotta like the person, but like be professional, be respectful. Like they don't
Mm-hmm.
have to earn it. You're the cop. You have
Mm-hmm.
you. That's not
Yes.
negotiable.
Nope, you're 100% right. And the way that I say it is that, like, there's not one citizen out there that took the oath to be respectful, to be professional. And we are always, I expect us to always operate at the highest of standards, especially when someone's pushing your buttons and trying to get you to react. And it sucks being instigated, been there.
Hmm.
And you have to take a deep breath and you have to understand that majority of the times, if not all of the times, they're attacking the uniform and not you. And also, when you do take in consideration that, like, they may have had a really terrible, unjust, uncalled for interaction with an officer, that's going to reflect when they do deal with another officer. And you can either compound that trauma and add to it, or you could be the reason that they change their mind about law enforcement.
Yeah, that's such a thing. And even if you've navigated your whole career and you really haven't lost your cool, you really haven't had that contempt of cop op interaction where I'll say like, "Hey, I have said these begrudging things, like under muttered under my breath, like walked away, like someone fought like my buddy or me, and I'm like, you MF or like whatever it is." Like I can look back and say that was unprofessional, that was immature, right? I was not well emotionally regulated, and I'm not trying to cast judgment at those that have been in that situation, but I will throw some shade on those that recognize they're getting to that point, and especially with the level of awareness and training and able and these kind of intervention trainings that we get now more and more so. If you realize that you're getting hot and you have a buddy there and you're not, hey, can we switch? Like, or
Mm-hmm.
your buddy, or you see your buddy getting hot and you just like
Mm-hmm.
watch and you don't step in and say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I got this. Like, I'll talk to him or her. Like, if you
Mm-hmm.
don't do that, then you do own part of that. I think it's so impactful when people that fight, that run, that get arrested, at the end of the day, when they calm down because the officer's calm and they generally say, "Yeah, my bad," or your police department, like fill in the blank police department, you guys have never really done me wrong. This is what happened. I think that there's a lot that you can kind of glean from that to say like, yeah, we're doing the job as professionally as we can. It brings me a lot of satisfaction when I review use of force reports because unfortunately that's kind of the vein I see a lot of my officers interactions, but it brings me so much satisfaction when even though like I'm feeling emotional listening to how people are talking to them or how they're talking to the victim in the other room. They're instigating, they're pouring gas on the fire, but to watch officers keep it together, I'm like,
Yeah.
some of these are really new officers, and I'm like, man, these folks have the right stuff, the right values, the right disposition, and the right training that
Yeah.
they are doing way better and way more emotionally mature and way more emotionally intelligent than I was at 22 years old. And so
Yeah.
I do feel very hopeful for the culture in light of a lot of the scrutiny that we've gotten.
Yeah, and you know what else, Eric? I was thinking about our conversation earlier with the benefits and the privilege that we have growing up in another culture,
Mm,
because, like, I love the quote that says, "You don't see things as they are, you see things as you are."
mm,
And I am never gonna forget. First of all, I'm very, very, very big on being trauma informed. I think that, like, I wish if the academy was like twice as long, I would spend months talking to the cadets and the officers about the importance of being what does it mean to be trauma informed. And I have been in rooms before where there was hundreds of officers, like 200 plus officers, and the speaker would say like, "Who knows what the ACEs score is? Who knows what the ACEs study is?" And like one person raises their hand, or like a handful of people raise their hands, and to me, that's crushing. That's
mm,
terrible. Because if you knew the extent of how trauma impacts every facet of our life, you would understand other people's circumstances better. I am not making excuses. I am not taking accountability away from people. I am like 110% for accountability with everybody all the time. But like understanding deeply how child abuse impacts somebody, how neglect impacts somebody, growing up and being a part of or witnessing domestic violence, being a survivor of sexual assault, poverty, gun violence. You mention it, I'm never going to forget. And this was like, made me so sad. I was at a gym, and it's a gym in a primarily minority and Black neighborhood. My sister texted me and she's like, "Hey, are you coming over?" And I said, "Yes." And she's like, "Can you please stop and get strawberries and blueberries for the kids?" And I said, "No problem. There's a grocery store right here. I'll run in there and I'll be over." And I walk in this grocery store that is a known chain grocery store. And when I tell you, I was stunned and speechless, and I have been stunned and speechless like two other times in my entire life. I looked around me, and like everything in the grocery store was pop, chips, and canned food, and sugary cereals and sugary yogurts. There's nothing in that store that I would have ever eaten, no matter how
It's
much I
like
was
food
starving.
desert, huh?
And liquor and like off-brand cleaning supplies. And I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, what? I thought I was walking into the same store that's by my parents and that's by my house, and that I've stopped in all these other communities. And why is this so different? And like, you can't tell me that the fact that I was in a primarily minority and Black neighborhood had nothing to do with it. Because why was there no vegetables, no fruit? Everything was canned. And like, I don't even want to start and talking about like the cycle of crap that comes from eating and growing up eating preservatives and canned foods, and then
Mm-hmm.
obesity, and then everything that comes from that, and bullying and mental health, and kids with suicidal ideations. Like the ripple effect of just not having access to fresh food is something that is absolutely detrimental to your childhood and your life as an adult.
Yeah.
And I was just like, the lady was like, "Can I help you?" And I was like, where do you guys not have like a fresh food section?" And she's like,
Produce.
"No, honey,
Yeah.
not here."
Wow.
And I'm like, that's BS. It is.
Yeah.
And our government does not do a great job in terms of prioritizing what our communities need.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're talking about nutrition or childcare or whatever the case may be, like that really made me sad. And it solidified what I already knew about lack of resources when it comes to certain communities within our jurisdiction, and how that has such a severe impact on the kids, the parents, and all that.
Yeah, and I'm kind of glad you brought it up because I mean, Blue Grit Wellness, like my Instagram, like where it all started was just kind of like health, like the simple ways that cops, first responders could be healthier. But like, what a connection! Because as we look at our societal issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
As we look at, even if you want to hone it into like the criminal justice system, and we play like a sliver of that, and so
Mm-hmm.
frequently the awareness is there that cops become the scapegoat and or the ones deemed responsible for everything in the criminal justice system. But truly, like education plays a part, healthcare
Yes.
plays a part, right? Resources. So if you have like a grocery store, like a big chain grocery store, not just a convenience store, but like a
Mm-hmm.
grocery store where a kid or a family can't just go buy an apple, like
Mm-hmm.
to get, and we know like this is science, this isn't woo, like, oh, health freaks. This is like you need nutrition to function
For
appropriately,
sure.
right? And if you
Mm-hmm.
want kids to focus in school, they need
Mm-hmm.
nutrition, they need regulated blood sugar, all these things, and on and on and on, right? And so
Yeah.
I think it is so relevant. And again, it's that level of empathy because, to go back to an earlier, your story about, the known prostitute or sex worker or what have you, like most of us now know that that person, that individual has been violently abused. Who knows how many times to get them to this point where they're continually violently abused? Like that is a
Yeah.
victim, right? Again, not to make excuses, and especially if they're committing other crimes, but something got that person there. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that the exercise I would invite people to do if they're pushing back on some of these messages is say, okay, like what got them to this point? Okay, what got them to that point? And you
Mm-hmm.
start going back in time of when this woman was let's say 28, when she was 21, okay, what did high school look like? What happened to her or what didn't happen to her? And then
Mhm.
and back and back and back. And then when they're kids, like what happened? Because I think we're all recognizing that the victims that we can all really resonate around and feel so impacted by as children, right? The innocence of
For sure.
children. And we're
Mhm.
all children at one time, right? We're all babies, and there's no fault there, right? There's no, like, they're truly innocent, but
Mhm.
things happen and they don't happen in certain ways that there is personal choice. However, there's so many other factors that anyone listening to the show has an extreme amount of privilege that's been afforded to them. Someone
Mhm.
might take that personally if I say it, but like just acknowledge the fact that you're listening to a podcast by some cop up in Washington. Like, you got
Right.
time and resource, right? You got time and resource. So
Yeah, and like I said, you and I keep saying this, and I cannot stress it enough. I do not make excuses at all whatsoever. One of my one of my siblings always says that, like, I'm so glad you are an officer and that you didn't go to law school, because if you ever made it into like a judge's chamber, you'd send everybody to either prison or hell. And that's how I was in the past, and like I'm very big on accountability, and you're not going to make excuses, especially if you're hurting other people, for things that you did or have happened to you in the past, because your traumas may not be your fault, but healing is your responsibility, you know?
yeah,
And again, we are not making excuses, but understanding like some of these people that I have met, especially or victims of crime that I have met, and now I have to label them as suspects and arrestees. I always ask them, like, on the way to jail, like, what happened? Why are you here today? Like, how did you start using coke? Why is like such a pretty and smart girl like you doing A, B, and C? And like when they tell me about their life, I'm like, you want to talk about privilege? I feel extremely privileged that I didn't have to deal with those circumstances, that I have loving parents, and like when we talk about privilege, I also think it's very important for us to talk about power, because those two words are sometimes and majority of the times go hand in hand. And when you are privileged and when you do have power, you have the ability to elevate or destroy other people's lives. And I always try to make things a little better for the people that I encounter. I may not be able to undo the terrible circumstances that caused me to come into their life in the first place, but I always ask myself, like, what can I do to just make things a little easier, a little better? And a lot of times it's like making that first phone call to a victim advocate, calling, whoever, crime scene cleanup, just being there for them, checking in on them. The little things that you and I and every other officer can do to help the families that we encounter.
I love that. I love that because it goes right back to like one of your personal tenets, which is clearly accountability, but that's like self accountability. Like that's leadership of self, that's ownership. And it makes me think about when we talk back about those narratives, like the negative narratives of a lot of law enforcement that have grown from deserved incidents of high attention. We'll put it that way, right? Whereas we can receive the shade, but we have the power to give people anecdote and evidence to disarm them and to challenge that narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
I received a complaint a few months ago, and it was essentially like cops responded to an area of someone holding a gun and waving it around, an argument with someone else. And when we showed up, our officers showed up. They located the similar described vehicle, same make, model, color, right? And then the physicals were close, but not quite on. But it turned out to be a teenage girl that was delivering food. So of
Mm-hmm.
course she's terrified when five cops roll up, when
Mm-hmm.
they had their guns out, right? They weren't pointing at her, but they had them out. And then pretty
Mm-hmm.
quickly, I think they read the body language, like, this is not her. And then
Mm-hmm.
a witness said, hey, I know that car actually left. That's the same kind of car. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I handled the call with mom, who is understandably, right, when we hear the circumstance, like understandably upset, frustrated, infuriated, right? And
Mm-hmm.
terrified for her daughter, who is also terrified. Through the conversation, all I could really do is just try to listen and try to validate some of those concerns, being a parent myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then through the conversation, she relayed very outwardly, very descriptively how little she trusts the police because this, that, and the other for
Mm-hmm.
quite amount of time. At the end of the conversation, which was decently dissatisfying, but also very informing to me is something that essentially she recognized that, hey, Commander Tong, you sound like a fine gentleman, but the fact is, like, I believe what I believe about the police. I've had a positive conversation here. If you weren't a cop and you were neighbors, we'd probably be cooking together. But
Mm-hmm.
you're a cop, so I don't trust you, and I don't want to come to the police station because I'm not going to come into the oppressive walls of your police station to look at your body cam as you've seen it, and you're trying to explain
Mm-hmm.
what happened and what didn't happen. I was like, well, we could meet somewhere else. She's like, absolutely not. Like, I don't even want to meet you. But what
Mm-hmm.
that told me was that she was not willing to challenge her narrative that much. But what
Mm-hmm.
I have to be hopeful for, and the reason why we all do this job, we have to stay hopeful towards the fact that I offered her something, an interaction,
Mm-hmm.
even though it was a phone call, that
Mm-hmm.
she had to challenge her narrative, even if she's unwilling to today or tomorrow or next year. Maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
a little bit closer, right? Or maybe when she
Mm-hmm.
has the conversation venting to a friend about what happened, and then maybe they ask, "Hey, did you talk to anyone? Did you talk to a boss?" She's like, "Yeah, I talked to this guy. How was he?" "Well, he was fine, but I didn't want to do these things." Maybe it helps the friend, right? And so I think that
Mm-hmm.
there's so much power in, as I like to try to remind others, is that when you're showing up to a call or an incident, you're not just giving an example to that one person you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's watching, and people even just
Everybody.
driving by, like, a block away, are watching you and your body language, how you're showing up, and like those
Yeah.
are huge opportunities to challenge some of these negative narratives of the prevailing culture, which are not true of the prevailing culture. But we got
Mm-hmm.
to prove it, and we have every every reason and opportunity to try our best to prove it.
I agree with you 100%. And I'm so glad that you handled that complaint in the way that you did, because at the end of the day, you have to do what you have to do, despite of the reaction or, what someone else chooses to take you up on. You could sit back and say, I tried, versus saying that, like, maybe having as much of a negative attitude as her and saying, well, if you don't want, and people say that, all the time out of resentment, out of anger, well, if you don't want to do it, then why are we having this conversation or whatever? Because it's so easy to get, we're human, right? It's so easy to get caught up in the same level of emotion as someone else that we're trying to de escalate and that we're trying to explain to them why we do certain things. And, I've had calls like that too. And I always tell the person, like, and this wasn't anything to that magnitude. It was a shoplifter that shoplifted from Home Depot and ran into J.C. Penney, and he kind of fit the description. And I was like a little bit assertive with him, like, "Sir, you can't go anywhere. Like, I'm just going to ask you to stay here with me until
Hmm.
we get a picture from the mail." And he was so nice, so understanding. And at the end, I shook his hand and I said, "Thank you so much for being so cooperative and so understanding, and just knowing that I'm really just trying to do my job." And he's like, "Yeah, no problem, but you're not going to get that from everybody, and it's okay. You still have to be professional, and you still have to do everything that you can do, because even if she declined every single one of your offers, that deep down inside she got off that phone and she's like, that guy was decent." So,
I love that, and there's like, even for like the patrol officer that might be newer listening to this, like there's so much power in just being transparent with people, saying, "Hey, you match, this is the call, you match the description. I'm not trying to jack you up." And I've seen officers do this so many times, just casually, not unsafe, right? They're not walking up with their hands in their
no,
pockets or on their phone, but
no.
like they're like, "Hey, this is what it is. You're not free to go. I do not want to use force or anything. But just be patient with me. If it's not you, like you say, it's not, like, awesome. Like, I will apologize to get you on your way." Most people are
Yeah,
reasonable. Most people are.
they are.
So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
and everything too, like, we know that sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say what you say. And the things that we employ and practice in our profession should be no different than how you treat your loved ones, Like, whether you're dealing with a kid or an adult. I used to be the type of aunt that tells the kids, like, I scream at them because they drive me nuts when they do anything to jeopardize their safety. Like, don't do that. Why?
Mhm.
Because I said
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Now, with my nieces and nephews that are from ages 1 to 8, or with my other nephew that's 18, I say things like, please don't do that because I don't want to see you get hurt, because you're going to fall, because it's whatever. And I give them the why. And I'm very, very, very careful with my delivery, because I don't want them looking at me as an authority figure. And I don't want them thinking that my knee jerk reaction is going to be to yell and is going to be to criticize. And that, I've come a very, very long way with that because I want to be their go-to.
Yeah, and it makes you credible, it builds trust, right? And so it
Hmm.
literally, if it's, "Hey, do me a favor, don't put your hands in your pockets," and someone does it again, "Hey, if you put your hands in your pockets, I'm worried that you're gonna pull something and I'm gonna have to use force. I don't wanna do," like, if you're just honest and then they do it
Right,
again, like, what does that tell you, right? For safety purposes, but most of the
right.
time, again, people will they won't, right? They're like, "Oh, okay, now, like, I didn't think about that. Like, I didn't think
Yeah.
about how, oh, it's cold. Okay, can I frisk you real quick?" Usually
Hmm.
people are cool with that, right? Because they just
Yeah.
really wanna put their hands in their pockets. So, yeah, there's
Hmm.
tangible takeaways from just, like, just leveling with people.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
we covered so much ground and, like, so many leadership nuggets from you. I do wanna ask, as far as your experience in law enforcement, have there been significant hurdles that you've perceived and felt from being female, from being Arab or being Muslim?
First of all, with what we were talking about in the beginning, I always make sure to tell people that, and you talked about this with your teenage years, your young adult years, and so did I, how everything that we grew up thinking is a liability, like my name sounds different, I eat different food, we dress differently, we believe in different things. Every single thing that we may have labeled as a liability is really our biggest asset,
Mm,
to our agencies, to our communities, to our group of friends. What makes us different is what makes us unique, and it helps us give like a certain degree of diversity with a lot of things that we are involved in. And when I say diversity, I'm not just talking about like race, gender, and sex. I'm talking about diversity and experiences. So I love that you brought that up, that like, we try to like hide who we are, we try to be someone different, and like that just doesn't work because who you are is always good enough. In terms of I'm not going to call it discrimination because I don't think that that would be a correct or fair or accurate label. I'm going to call it BS.
mm,
That's what I'm going
yeah,
to call it.
yeah,
I think that for the most part, I want to say like the first maybe 3 to 5 years, hopefully no longer than that, of my career, I really tried to like please other people,
yeah,
and what you learn is that like when someone is not on your team, when someone doesn't want to see you win, you could literally be like the unicorn of law enforcement and they're still not going to like it, and they're
it's so
still going
true.
to, right, they're still not going to
Haters
like
gonna hate.
you,
Yeah,
and then I don't know, I think it's like when I really started seeing that people, the right people, were in love with who I was as a person. And that gave me every single one of the opportunities that I have been pulled into. And we always hear people say, like, opportunity does not come knocking. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it absolutely does when you work your butt off and you're out there, like, giving 110% every day, and you really plant the seed of this is who I am as a person. Like, I operate on like integrity, compassion, empathy, and like not only that, but like for officers out there that are maybe getting caught up mentally in the fact that they're not being accepted or celebrated by their department, I would encourage you to gauge your success with how the community feels about you.
mm,
Because if the community feels that you're doing everything right and you have a couple people or a handful or a couple of handfuls of people in your department, depending on the size of your department, that don't favor you as a person, it would be shame on you to even entertain that conversation.
oh, wow.
Because in all reality, you're not there for them. Are you going to jump in the fight if things happen? Absolutely. We're all going to be there for each other, regardless if I hate you or love you. I'm going to be there. I'll take a bullet for you. We're all going to the same call together. I'm going to do everything I can for you and your family. And this is something that I wanted to mention earlier, since you talk a lot about like officer wellness. I hate with a passion. I don't want to say, like, I'm very careful and cautious when I say this because I don't want to come off offensive, but I hate the front that law enforcement puts on during police funerals. I've gone to like a handful of police funerals, unfortunately, and I'm like, oh, how cute! Look at us all dressed up. We're being very comforting to each other, and you know, saying all of these nice things about the officer that passed, whether it was from like a felonious assault or, God forbid, a suicide or whatever. And I hate that because why the hell are we not like that 24/7?
Mm,
Why are we
yes.
so quick to be like white gloves and hats and Class A uniforms when someone's dead and we can no longer do anything for them. Why are we not that loving and compassionate towards each other every other day of the year? You know what I mean?
Because
I
we eat
hated
our
that.
own, right? Like
Right.
we're talking smack, and it's like this squad versus that squad, or like this officer doesn't grab paper, but this officer doesn't do proactive work. It's always
Mm-hmm.
this like the shame, right? The
And I'm
judgment.
not, yeah, and I'm not saying don't vent, and I'm not saying don't call people out on their laziness or their BS or the milking calls, but there is a way to do things, you know? And this is something else that I've held myself accountable to because, like, yeah, there's some things that go on at work that I don't like, and there's some people that I don't favor, but I ask myself at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of their career, if something bad happens to that person, I want to be like, I was not a part of the problem. And sometimes, like, I was a part of the problem because instead of saying that, like, hey, I noticed that you keep making this error on your report. Like, is there something that you don't understand? Am I not doing a good job explaining things? Help me help you. Tell me exactly what I could be doing differently. Maybe I'm teaching in a way that you don't learn, you know? And I really try to dissect the problem and make sure that I'm a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. And like, I always check in with officers, which like we have to be careful with as a female officer. Me texting another officer saying that, like, which by the way, I did really early on in my career around Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year, like holidays that I knew everybody else celebrated, I would
Mm,
text every officer. And some took it out of context. So I had to stop doing that, you
mm,
know? In my culture, that's normal. In my
sure,
culture, that's very, very, very normal. In like the Arab American, regardless if you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, it is very normal and expected behavior for you to reach out to people on certain occasions or holidays, or you know, if there's a death in the family or whatever. But I really did have to stop doing that because people took it out of context and it became more of a headache and a liability than not. And it sucks because now I cut my contact with all of these people because of something that you chose to perceive wrong, and something that, like, I don't want to say a rumor, but like you took something so out of context that it
sure,
really impacted my. So there's so much within our police culture that, like, made me understand on a deeper level why we have the problems that we have in
yeah,
terms of, like, you want to talk about like discrimination, sexism, language that we shouldn't be using, whether you're inside the police department or on a call. And then the point that you brought up, like, I've worked with people on a local and state level that saw my passion and potential and were like, no, you stop right there. We have to hide you. We have to, like, keep you from certain opportunities. We're not going to let you do A, B, and C. And then I've worked with other people that I couldn't get in the door and they kicked the door open for me. And they
mm,
made sure that I had a place at the table. And they're like, this girl, she's got passion, she's got potential. You know, they gave me like the reason I would like to say that the biggest reason that I got the IACP 40 under 40 is because I was appointed by Governor DeWine for a position for the second time to be the inaugural director of the Office of Law Enforcement Recruitment. And I was thinking, like, who the hell am I to be in this position? You
mm,
know, it was such an honor. It's so far the biggest and most incredible honor of my entire career. And, you know, we bring up conversations like 30 by 30 and Nolly and supporting women in law enforcement. Let's not forget that our male counterparts are at times our biggest advocators, and they are such an important part of the conversation because up until a couple of years ago, all of my mentors and the best, most impactful leaders in my life were all male.
yeah,
And when I struggled to get to certain things, they made sure that they did everything in their power to make it happen. And I wouldn't be here without them today. So, yeah, have I faced some BS in my career because I'm first generation Arab American Muslim woman? Yes, I have. And it's unfortunate. And for those people that, like, always think that I had an agenda or an ulterior motive. Like, I hope I proved you wrong because from day one, my agenda and my motive is just to make us better as a profession and make our community a safer place. And that's it. It was never about me. You just have to tune out the noise. And I encourage everybody to watch the movie Race, which is an
mm,
autobiography of Jesse Owens from
yeah,
Ohio State University. And there's a clip on YouTube that I use in a lot of my classes when I teach, when he was practicing for the Olympics and he was around the football team and they were calling him a whole bunch of racial slurs and his coach told him you have to tune out the noise. And it's no different with us in law enforcement, and unfortunately sometimes all of that noise comes within the police department. Sometimes it comes from outside of the police department, but either way you have to stay focused and you got to keep moving forward.
There's so much you said there, and I just to rewind back a little bit of what stuck out to me was, yeah, like who are you doing it for? And that's that sense of why. I think whenever we recognize these points of adversity in the last few years, like we have to think about like why are we doing this job? And that's I'd like to think and I believe that the majority of people that stayed in is because their why is strong. They were reminded of it, and they're like, hey, just despite all that, or I got to up the ante. Like I have even more reason to keep doing what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about toxic culture earlier in the interview, and I do want to invite those that are like, man, like I don't even know what I'm doing. The people around me are so toxic. Like, cool, a lot of places are hiring. Like, you can be part of the change, but if it's too much and it's going to sacrifice your ability to serve others in this very critical role, and you want to be a cop, like, think about, rather than leaving, think about lateraling, right? Like, look at that opportunity. But you put such a flip on it where, yes, like, what does the community think about your police work? And it's hard to do alone if you really feel like you're siloed and you're like really one of the people. Like, maybe everything we're saying is resonating with you and the rest of your crew or your department really isn't on board, because that's
Mm-hmm.
very much possible. Then maybe like you vote with your feet and you go do that good work somewhere else. And
Yeah.
that's only a personal choice you got to make.
Yeah. And I also have to add that, like, I really take things with a grain of salt when people treat me like that, because this is so sad and so disheartening to say. That's learned behavior. And, somebody may have told them that, like, watch out for so and so, they're gonna do this, or like, so I always take things with a grain of salt, and I always try to mentor people regardless of rank, regardless of age. I try to put myself in a position to show them who I really am and that there's nothing to fear here and that we're on the same team. And that might, and I'm not saying that you should like go out of your way to change people's minds on how they feel about you, but also recognize that sometimes that defensiveness is just them protecting themselves because of how they have been, I don't want to say groomed, but because of how they had to be in order to survive their environment, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It's like kind of that chameleon into the culture, right? And so we become, we become the good, we become the bad. We're super malleable to
Mm-hmm.
culture, and that's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of wrapped with a lot of important notes, which is that, yes, like there you had advocates and you had
Mm-hmm.
mentors. And when I said yes, like when you said, as far as like promoting women in policing and these notions and how a lot of your advocates were male, I was saying yes because there's several female colleagues that have kind of echoed that thing. They're like, yes, I love 30 by 30, I love what it's about, but this isn't just about us, it's about just the
Mm-hmm.
team, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I love that it is collaborative. And so some people, many people get really, I think, the wrong idea about that, and they get defensive and they think it's,
Mm-hmm.
affirmative action. But let's recognize the underrepresentation. And I love how you circled around a lot of these very valuable tenets, and where you started in the conversation was from such a humble place, and we've spanned a lot of topics. And certainly, for you to focus back in on this point of extreme humility, I think speaks so much to your cult. I was going to say character, but like, yeah, your culture of caring that you put out in those you work around, and probably what makes you really successful with your team and why you resonate so much.
Yeah, and every time that I mention success, I always like to clarify that to me, success is about impact and influence.
Yes, those are
I
huge.
wish I was talking about it from a financial standpoint, but to me, because it's important for us, like words matter and like the definition of and the perception of those words matter. And I always strive for impact and influence and fulfillment. And that's how I gauge my success. And it's very different with everybody, but as long as I have those three things that are always in some kind of like circular operation within my personal and professional world, I feel successful.
Yes, absolutely. And this has been such a fantastic conversation. I could clearly go on and on, but I want to be respectful of your time. And I do want to ask, like, you got a little bit of time left. Maybe we can squeeze in one more, 40 under 40 for you.
Sure.
There is one more question I want to ask you, and it's because
Yes.
you are such a doer, you're so convicted clearly, you hold such a high standard for yourself, very obviously, and you talked about compassion fatigue. Like, what do you do to
Hmm.
support that, foster that, give yourself grace? Because there are a lot of people that are going to be listening in that does resonate with them, right? They're doers, they're very self-critical, they want to accomplish things, they want to help their people, but there is that burnout risk of someone
For
that
sure.
is out there crushing it so hard like you.
Yeah, so I think I do a great job taking care of myself. That has not always been the case because I didn't have boundaries before in terms of saying no and turning down opportunities. And I would say that like I always sleep really well. I work out. Like I was just at the gym before our
Yeah,
podcast today.
love it.
Yeah, and I have an amazing, amazing, amazing support system. In the past, really bad days after really bad calls, I have dozens of people that I can call, which is such a privilege and so awesome for me to be able to say that. I've called my sisters crying before. I've called my mom crying before. I've called my best friends crying, some of my mentors, and I get it off my chest. And afterwards, I'm either okay, I plan to go to the gym in the morning, or I take a day off and I don't tell anybody, and I just base it off self-care. And I also want to put a golden nugget in there and say that yoga absolutely changed my life.
Wow.
Changed, and I'm not saying like from the physical aspect is great, but when I started yoga, I until recently I've never ever done anything but hot yoga. Like it's so addicting and I don't want to do anything else. But in yoga also, you have to understand like the mental aspect of it is like
Hmm.
they teach you things that other aspects of life don't teach you and other people don't talk about. Like, and you can say, like, oh, it sounds cliche, it sounds corny, whatever. No, as a human being, especially in law enforcement, you do need to learn compassion, self-love, why it's unhealthy to be, why it's very unhealthy to be a perfectionist, being patient with yourself, and really surrounding yourself with people that operate under the same mindset. And one of my best friends, who is a clinician, she works with me, and we have all these conversations all the time. And she does such an amazing job getting me back on track when I do fall off the wagon in terms of like when I make a mistake at work or when I forget to do something or if I go a week without working out. And it's like you have to look at yourself as a whole person and what you're doing to alleviate the stress that you don't need to be dealing with in the first place. You know, like you have to let certain things roll off your back. You have to let go of the expectation of being a perfectionist. You have to like adopt things in your life that are new and could be uncomfortable at first. And I'm not saying go out there and sign up for a yoga class because it's not a one size fits all. And what works for me may not work for you. You know, so for some people, it's running. I did long distance running for 5 years. I'm staring at my medals right now and it's making my knees hurt. But
Nice.
like,
But that's a
it's
chapter,
different
right? Yeah, like
for sure. A
yeah.
huge chapter and an awesome chapter. And um, yeah, you have to take care of yourself. And we're all going to suffer from something in law enforcement, whether it's compassion fatigue, whether it's anxiety, and you have to find what works for you in terms of getting yourself back on track and staying healthy because we know that a lot of officers self-medicate. Thank God, because of personal reasons and religion. Like, I don't smoke, I don't drink. And I know when I'm having a really bad day, and I am not ashamed to bawl my eyes out for 5 minutes, eat some comfy food like fried chicken or mozzarella sticks or pizza or whatever the case may be, and
Yeah.
reach out to my support network, and we're good. You just need that hard reset.
Yeah. I love that. I'm glad we got to cover all that because there's so many like little tangible nuggets that are going to be really helpful for somebody. And shout
Yeah.
out for yoga, Kendall Wood, Vance Rowe, and Erica from Tech Mobility being on prior episodes. So, well, Sarah, thank you so much. Where can people find you? And dare I ask, what's next? What's next on your before all the haters like pop up their heads? They're like, no, blocker, blocker, don't let it happen.
Please find me on LinkedIn, Sarah Shendy. My profile is public because I love writing about leadership, about empathy. a lot of my posts, all of my posts are job related and on a wide variety of topics. I am very, very passionate about leadership, though, because everything within our life and our department rises and falls on leadership. And one day, I do hope to lead a department. I do aspire to be a chief of police one day. That's what I say, but I know that God has a plan for me, and I do not resist any of the amazing and great opportunities that continue to fall in my lap. And yeah, like while we fixate and focus on our end goal, it's equally important to like enjoy the journey, you know?
Yeah.
So I love, love, love the department that I'm with now. I work with the most amazing group of people. I have the best administrative staff. They are so supportive in every aspect. When I say that we're like a family, I look forward to going to work. I hate not being at work. And a lot of the officers and even the non-sworn staff feel the same way. It's amazing.
That is
But
amazing.
yeah, I'm just going to continue to give 110% every day and see what happens.
Yeah, shout out for Case if you're out in that region in Midwest and you're like looking for a
Yes.
spot. Sounds like a gem.
Yeah.
No, thank you so much, Sharon. There's absolutely no reason why you won't be a leader, the leader, the chief, the sheriff of a department if that is what you so choose, and as you recognize, if that's what's chosen for you. Certainly, you're not missing anything as far as the leadership and the acumen and the care, which is 100% like that. That's what makes leaders is just giving a damn. So, thank
Thank
you so
you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and thank you for your time.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.